The question is, do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country?
For me, the principle that we work best when we work together, without coercion or conscription, bullying or bossiness.
Always whenever someone says, oh, peace and sausage, and it's a roll and sausage, and it's sausage roll, we're better together.
Well, they didn't. It was us. We invented it, just like every other bloody thing.
Well, that's very interesting.
We have very serious the referendum. It seems to me that they're not dealing with the issues.
Hi, if you've been fed up with most of the debate until now, the Scottish Independence Podcast is your chance to hear some different views on what the independence referendum means for Scotland.
And welcome to Scottish Independence Podcast number 13. And this time I spoke with Robin McAlpine, who's the editor of the Scottish Left Review, and amongst other things as well, is the director of the advocacy group, the Reid Foundation. They produce many reports that are well worth reading. We had a conversation that I think is definitely going to interest you, so we'll just go straight to it. Hello, today I'm with Robin McAlpine, who's the director of the Reid Foundation and also writes for quite a lot of different Scottish publications. And so, yeah, hello Rob. Hello Robin.
Hi.
First thing I suppose is you had an article in the Scotsman this week, and you were calling for a couple of things in that article. Would you like to explain about it?
Well, I mean, the article was really following up from a paper which has been published by the Scottish Independence Convention, which was about the processes and the means for dealing with the constitutional change issue with independence. Now, this was something that was published by the Independence Convention. I've been involved with it because there was a real frustration that people didn't understand the processes through which independence would actually be achieved if there was a yes vote in the referendum. Now, this is really important because what the No campaign has tried to do is to try to get the Yes campaign to identify in great detail every aspect of a future Scottish state, which is absolutely ridiculous. What we've got to do instead is talk in terms of what are the things that will happen, what are the processes that will take place, so that we can understand where what the steps are to becoming an independent nation. And this is really important for pro-independence supporters, because when you see the steps and you understand the processes for how you get there, it seems normal, ordinary, straightforward. It's not a difficult process.
Taking it out of fantasy land and putting it into real world.
Yeah, but even more than that, just understanding that at each stage, you still have control. As a member of the Scottish public, you still have control. This is a democratic process. And all the big decisions, all the crucial things which people are talking about, these are decisions for a democratic parliament. And if you can understand how we get to that parliament, it makes it a lot easier to understand what it is that you're voting for. So one of the things that was in that paper, and I think it's quite important, is the principle that at each stage, we should defer to democracy as much as is possible when we are setting up and establishing an independent Scotland. So there's three rough stages. You've got to negotiate independent separation terms with the rest of the UK, and that will also involve discussions with the EU and a few other multinational organisations. And then after that, we have to set some kind of constitution. Now, this doesn't have to be complex. We've got to deal with things such as who's a citizen, how do they vote, who's got voting rights, how does a parliament work. The basic architecture of a democratic nation state. We've got to deal with that. And then we elect a parliament and we make decisions. Now, the question about something like currency, for example, what currency will we use? The transitionary arrangements will need to be put in place with negotiations. But this isn't a matter either for negotiations to settle or for a constitution to settle. These are decisions that are made by a democratically elected parliament. Now, when people understand this, when they get a sense of what currency will we use, well, you'll be able to vote in that. That's a decision that you'll be able to make. It helps to put the whole thing into a lot more of a context which makes sense. And that's why I thought it was really important. And I thought it was important that Scotsman readers got a chance to hear some of this stuff. Just
to go back to that a second. So it's a decision that you'll be able to make. Like, was one of those options, like, for example, it could be a multi-question referendum, monarchy or no monarchy, pound or euro. Should that be done in the Parliament or as a multi-question referendum?
One of the other great joys about opening up this question is we can start to think about those very questions. I personally favour as much as possible to be done through straightforward democratic processes. I'm actually not a giant fan of stripping away too many issues and putting them into referendums to deal with. It tends to cause unhelpful focuses, like, for example, the whole focus on trying to get rid of Clause 4 with the gay teaching prohibition in schools. Once you put it out there, you quite often get rather unhelpful debates, and I think democracy is a better way to go. But on the other hand, at the Reid Foundation more generally, we're looking at important issues and things such as participative democracy. How do people get meaningfully involved in these decisions? And I think we've got a lot that we can learn from the Icelandic process of how they developed their constitution. But to answer something like, for example, currency, the question with currency seems to me to be fairly straightforward. And the way I think the independence movement should frame this is just to say, we will have sterling as a transitionary currency. Once we have a parliament, we should set some straightforward economic tests, just like New Labour did when they were talking about joining the euro. And
Did you almost say neo-Labour there? Sorry.
It's a cold. It's cold. It's not Freudian, honestly. No, New Labour at Westminster. But there are 5 tests for do we join the euro? We just need to do something similar in Scotland. We say here are the options: currency tied to the pound, free-floating Scottish currency, membership of the euro, or being part of a sterling zone. It is an easy decision to make eventually. It's just something that democracy deals with. The issues which have to be dealt with at the constitution stage would include head of state. So we probably do need to start to think about what we do with the head of state issue at the stage of developing the constitution. But then again, there are wonderful models for this. If anyone doesn't know what happened in Iceland, they should really go and look at it. We're going to have an article in the next Scottish Left Review which explains how they developed their constitution. There are some wonderful models for participative ways of making these decisions, but we've just got to identify which decision is made at which stage, and don't allow the Yes campaign to bully us or hector us into making decisions that are not ours to make, but are the decisions of the Scottish population to make in a democratic election.
So anyone can go and read that. Could you give us the name of the paper?
Yeah, if people want to go and have a look at the Scottish Independence Convention's paper, I think I recommend it's called Arrangements for Achieving Constitutional Change or something like that. It's on the homepage of the Scottish Independence Convention's website, so you'll find it there to download.
Okay, thanks. And there's another paper I looked through recently from the Reid Foundation itself, but we'll come to the Reid Foundation itself later. But the Silent Crisis, Failure and Revival in Local Democracy. And I thought that was a very interesting paper. Is there any way you could give us a quick run through the ideas in that? Because I think people would like to hear.
Yeah, it was very straightforward. The Silent Crisis had a very quick look at democracy in Scotland. At a national level, we're a strong democratic country with a proportional parliament. At a local level, we have the lowest level of democracy of any developed country that we could find. Certainly, we're not just behind the rest of Europe in terms of levels of local democracy. We are miles behind Europe in levels of local democracy. We set, I think it was 6 major benchmarks that we used as many countries as we possibly could to judge how Scotland was doing, and we came bottom of every single measure apart from one, and that was turnout in local elections. And the only people that were worse was England. So this is every measure: turnout, interest, number of people who stand for elections, number of people contesting a seat, size of local authorities, and everything. Scotland is the least democratic country that we could find. Now, this is really important, and it links directly to the independence debate. This idea that we should be having a process of government which is managed at a suitable distance away from the public is a very Westminster thing. And actually, I think it's more than that. It's part of the neoliberal project. If you have the enormous size of local authorities that we've got in Scotland, they are just statistically, by land area and by number of people contained in them, they are ginormous by the standards of local democracy in other democracies. And what it means is that people can't really keep a proper eye on what's going on. It makes it a hell of an easy for big local authorities at senior management level to start running our communities in a sort of unspoken partnership with the corporate sector. This is the kind of processes that seem to be happening, that more and more outsourcing is happening, and bluntly, there's no democratic means for dealing with that. So this is an important problem for Scotland, but it's also an important reflection of the problems of the attitudes of the British state. This idea, vote once every 5 years, and go away and don't bother us in between. And it's this idea of moving towards a society which is run by elites and not really being run with the consent of the wider public.
I think people in Scotland also sort of regard local elections, or people in Britain in general regard local elections as a joke. The way I might see that is that because, from what you're saying, the power's already been divvied up between sort of interest groups. So maybe they're right in thinking that, although it's not necessarily a progressive view, but it might be right that it is a joke because it doesn't really change much. I mean, hardly anyone votes in a council election.
Yeah, it's a very bad joke, and it's a very bad joke for two reasons. People in some regards are right. There is an international literature in this, and in the report, the Reid Foundation report, The Silent Crisis, we do go over this in some detail. There's a standard and accepted international explanation of this, which is people tend to vote in proportion to how important they see the powers of the institution for which they're voting, and in terms of how much they feel their vote's going to influence the outcome. Now, on that basis, the people of Scotland are almost quite right to not bother at local elections. If you live in a small town, I live in a comparatively small town, we're stuck in the local authority area of South Lanarkshire. That means that it's 45 miles from here to the place where the decisions that are made about our town takes place. The only democratic role that we've got is to elect one person, one councillor, to drive 45 miles and sit in a room of politicians from an enormous area. Let's say we wanted something done in our town. All we can do is lobby like supplicants. There is no democratic means of us saying, here's what we'd like to do, and we're going to elect somebody that can do that. All we can do is say, here's what we'd like to do. We'll elect one person who can go and beg. Now, for that reason, it is kind of a joke if you're going to say that any meaningful community, it can make a decision about itself. It can.
So have you got an example of how it maybe works better in other countries?
Not other countries, almost every other country. I'm going to take the thing which surprised me most. In France, for example, some of the local authority areas can be as small as 150 people in its lowest level of local democracy. Now that sounds crazy, but these are small rural communities, and they actually have local authorities with power. So across France and across most of the Nordic countries, Germany as well, things like childcare are provided and organised at the very most local level. So you might only be a tiny little village of 150 people voting, but you still have the power to arrange the childcare to suit your community. So maybe it is a large provider, or maybe you think the better strategy is to use a number of local individual childminders or whatever. But these are decisions for a community to make. Now, that's almost universal right across Europe. Almost everybody leaves childcare arrangements to the very most local level. What I was quite surprised at is that in Norway, the health service is run at a very local level. It's not the very lowest level, but it's the one above that. So each hospital is managed by its community, the community that it serves, and they do perfectly well with that arrangements. The idea that in Britain, a community would be allowed to run its own hospital would be scoffed at. Senior managers would look down their pinstripe noses at people who thought they had the ability or the capacity to run their local hospital, because they've infantilized the entire British electorate. We're not treated like we can do these things for ourselves. We're only supposed to mandate people better than us to go and do this properly on their behalf. But that's not how it works in other places. And again, there is a direct relationship with the independence debate here. Don't you worry, Scotland. We'll manage things in your own affairs. If you end up having a democratically elected parliament as a nation state with the powers to do whatever, you're bound to screw this up. You better just leave it to an entity, an organisation, which is staffed primarily with what you would call elite professionals who are not greatly accountable. So this lack of local democracy reflects the British state's lack of interest in democracy generally. It really doesn't expect the population to interfere with the basic running of the British state. And to be quite honest, the British state has quite often worked to kind of disregard the interests or the views of the general public in all sorts of areas. So yeah, the lack of local democracy is a direct relationship, bears a direct relationship to the independence movement and the attitudes and the approaches of the British state.
Yeah, I mean, it's also about, management politics culture in Westminster. Is that even more pronounced in local government, you think? What you're saying, a local group would not be allowed to run something like a hospital, or in Britain, not even childcare like in France, although childcare is not, I don't mean to say not even, because obviously a very important issue. But you know what I mean. The way that they treat people in an infantile way, but management politics